Hello and welcome to the Expanse Abridged Podcast series. Today we've got Chapter 18, a Miller chapter of Leviathan Wakes. Naturally the first book in the Expanse series. I sometimes say at the start of an episode, despite at this point you've probably listened to about 4 hours of me if you've got here. So good for you. I hope you're nice and well. And I haven't given you tinnitus. But yes, we've got a Miller chapter today. The last we saw Miller... it's kind of dealing with the consequences, really, of him finding out he's shite at his job and that kind of big issues. And we get more of that in this chapter as well, of the kind of the world coming down around him when he thought he was good and everyone thought he was shite. He was the laughingstock. He was the joke. And this chapter kind of expands upon it. The context of this chapter is the Donager, the news of that, the big Martian warship where Holden and the boys was. That news has kind of hit the belt. And people are reacting to it. And we see that in the opening paragraph of this chapter. People are chanting slogans, "We did it once, we can do it again," and drop some rocks on them, i.e. dropping asteroids on the inners, those belters who live down the gravity well. And it's kind of dealing with that. And Miller thinks that the Donager has done something worse than the Canterbury, because the Canterbury, when that went up, made everyone angry, and it kind of took away their complacency. Miller says the Donager had done something worse, it had taken away the fear. Belters had got a sudden, decisive, and unexpected win. It would have scared Miller more if he'd been sober. Because obviously our boy Miller, our hero, is having a bit of an alcoholic phase. And it says his alarm's been going on the last 10 minutes. He's lying in bed. Illusions, oral hallucinations, the voice of a whirlwind. And the previous bottles of fungal faux bourbon sat next to his bed. So we've got a good old chat here. We've got some fungus, again, which we like to see. And we've also got that noise when you're lying in bed, your alarm's going off, and you're hungover, and you can't even get it, and you just sit there and take it. Not very fun. And Miller's kind of thinking about all the times he's fucked up and all that stuff. And he says, the beautiful thing about losing your illusions, he thought, was that you got to stop pretending. All the years he told himself that he was respected, that he was good at his job, that all his sacrifices had been made for a reason, fell away and left him with the clear, unmuddied knowledge that he was a functional alcoholic who had pared away everything good in his own life to make room for anesthetic. Everyone thought he was a joke. So he's not a very happy boy, Al Miller. He's quite depressed right now. He needs some happy pills. And he says the only person that respects him was Havelock and Eartha. You can almost read the contempt there. Bit of ethnic banter coming back. Different to the ethnic banter we had Naomi and Amos when we talk about Belter girls having good legs. But he's lying there and he's like, fuck, I have to get up now. And he does, but before he turns off the alarm, soft but insistent, a woman's voice. He didn't know what she'd been saying, but since she was just in his head, she'd get another chance later. He's also hallucinating with a woman's voice. And he has a breakfast. He has a Sigma male grind set breakfast, a hero of kings. Breakfast for kings, really. He says he sucked down some painkillers and rehydration goo. And then he had a bar of pressed yeast and a grape sweetener and a big shower. And he threw away the rest of the bourbon just to feel like he could do it. He gets to the office and Muss, who's the miserable lady, saying they're supposed to get there's been a rape and they've got the data from that and they're going to get that soon. And then she just kind of wanders off to go do her thing. Miller starts doing a little bit of work, but he's constantly thinking about a sentence from a couple chapters ago where Anderson Dawes said, we have Holden and you can't even find out what happened to your own riot gear. And it's making him feel really bad because this guy's just kind of really hit him hard about how shit he is at his job, or at least appearing to be shit anyway. And he's thinking about it because it doesn't make sense if the Donager's just gone up, because everyone knows Holden went into the Donager, so how can he survive? Like, it doesn't make any sense, and what proof is there? And he just keeps thinking about it, because if obviously he had survived, everybody would know about it, people would brag, and pirates and stuff would know. And then he starts thinking about how you'd cover it up. And he brings up a navigation plotter he had, which is, I think, is basically a device to let you it's like Google Maps almost, or like a city mapper, so you can just pick between points at certain times, and you can see how long it would take a ship to go there. And that's probably more important in space, because obviously the planet's moving all the time. So it's really important to know, like, on a certain date, when it would take, how long it would get from Earth to Mars. And he starts looking at it going, how long would it take to get from where the Donager blown up to Ceres and other places? And he makes a load of approximations. It's basically a market sizing case study he runs in his own head. And he gets bored at one point and gets some coffee, but he starts running the numbers of it takes 3 weeks to get here, add a few days either side to be safe. How many ships is that? I think he's like 18,000. Add the extra few ports. One of them's really busy because it's an agricultural one, which is Ganymede. It's famous for its gardens. Starts adding them up together again. And he realizes either that he's already at, what was it, 18,000, 17,000. 28,000 records. And then he realizes he can exclude ones that went to and from a Martian military base, because that wouldn't be them. So then he's at 17,000 records, and it would take him 118 days to get through that. He's doing about 150 a day. My quick maths, which I did earlier, but don't tell anyone. And he's running through his market case dicing. He's like, what other assumptions can I make to lower this number? And then he goes, well, they would have to use Epstein drives, because otherwise, if it was the kettle pot, which was the other one, where they like squirt hot water out the back, they would still be stuck in space because it wouldn't be quick enough. So they had to use their Jeffrey Epstein drive, and that knocks it down to 4,000 from 17,000, because most of the journeys would be little couriers between various kind of shuttles and between little space kind of depots, really, rather than anything else. And then he keeps trying to work his way down. Be like, they would have had to put a flight plan in before the Donner got killed, because obviously they're coming from. So they couldn't have done that, because otherwise they wouldn't know the Donner was going up. And then he already also gets down to about 4,000, which is far more manageable, and he can start, or no, less than 4,000 now, and he can start doing through it. But he has to assign the kind of request for information to a load of random cases, because otherwise Shadid, the captain, would find him. Because as we learned last chapter, Shadid's been monitoring his work on the project. Is why his message never got out to Julie Mao, like Jules Pierre Mao. The message never got sent out because they intercepted it, and they were just kind of ticking him along the entire time, like tricking him. So he sends off his big data request after doing his market sizing case study, which proves that in another life Miller would have been a management consultant and he would have loved it. And he gets a call from the kind of lab. It says we've got the rape results back, which is they've got the blokes come. They've got his DNA. They've nicked it, and they've issued an arrest warrant for him. A guy called Emmanuel Corvus, which is a pretty cool name. And Miller feels a slow smile creep on his lips. We get a nice little thing where Miller goes down to the accounting part, because his bloke's an accountant, because accountants are evil, and I would never be one. And he pops down to the offices down there. It's in like the government area. It's a bit posher than he normally goes, and explains he wants to speak to this guy. And an older man in a good suit came through the front door first, rather than Emmanuel, and starts giving him the lawyer speak, saying, "Before you continue, detective, my client is involved with very high-level negotiations, etc., etc., etc." And Miller says, I want to just get this over and done with. Can you do this another time? And then Miller turns to Mr. Dowd, who's going to arrest, and says, "What I'm about to do to you is literally the only bright spot in my day. If you could see your way clear to resisting arrest, I'd really appreciate it." And he takes him outside, and he straps him to the police cart so everyone can have a look at him. And Miller just waits a little bit, and he's looking around, and he spots a young woman in a professional dress with the face of a fighter, and he stares at Dowd. And Dowd is kind of like shies away when he's doing it. And the woman looks at Miller, nods once, and Miller nods back. And Miller goes home, goes back to the office, does paperwork again, and gets all sorted out. It says 2 hours later, he'd finished the paperwork. 3.5 hours later, the first of his data requests had come through for all the shipping docks. And 5 hours later, the government collapsed. Which is, a normal afternoon for Miller at the moment. But it's nice he finally did a good bit of work, and he was actually doing a little bit of thinking about his case study, which is again that dynamic I've spoke before about these Miller chapters, where he's both simultaneously shit at his job because he thinks really high of himself, and then you kind of see evidence that he's half decent at it, which is nice. I guess when he's trying to, it's like the thing with work where when someone asks you to do something, you're like, I don't want to do this, and you don't care, and then you start doing it on your own. Which is the Julie Mao thing. When he cares and works for it, he can actually kind of do quite well. But then we cut to the next, after the government's collapsed, we cut to a bit later on, and Captain Shadid is talking to everybody again, saying, you would have heard this by now, but the UN is responding to a request from Mars, is withdrawing its oversight and protection of Ceres Station. And she says, it's not a coup. I'm not going to say that again. This isn't a coup. She keeps trying to reiterate it, but Earth is pulling out of here. Which obviously that's where their contract comes from, so it's quite scary. She says, we're still the law. We're remaining, but there's going to be a new provisional government joined with kind of staff and members of local business and union reps to replace them. All the police are obviously shitting themselves about if the UN isn't there protecting Ceres, what is Mars going to do? A load of people there have arrived in the middle of the night, so they look really rough. You get a description of that, and everyone's looking at each other going, who's going to pay Star Helix? Whose laws are we enforcing? Why is Earth walking away from the biggest port in the belt? Who's going to negotiate the peace treaty now if Earth's pulling out? And Muss, his boring companion, goes, I've got to go. I've got a call to make. Miller says, up the call, and she doesn't answer because she didn't have to. Series didn't have laws, it had the police. Which obviously, I think it was last chapter, the one before, Muss talked about if the government ever goes down, or there is a war, there's some people she wants to go kill that she knew she knew, I think, child rapist or child rape squad she was on, something like that, and she wanted to go finish him off. So Muss has donned her Batman mask, and she's gone to go be Judge Dredd, actually, because Batman doesn't kill people, but Judge Dredd does. He's a judge, jury, and executioner. And Miller kind of starts thinking about this as he wanders home, and he's basically like, why would the Earth abandon it? Because if the Earth abandons it, the idea is OPA would step in, so Mars is an excuse to go in and set martial law or attack the place. And Ceres and Earth contract had been the best hope for a negotiated peace, because it was Earth that could act as the broker man between these people. And Miller's kind of walking around, and he says to the empty air, what am I looking at, Julie? What do you see out there that's worth Mars and the Belt killing each other? And it says, the station hummed to itself, a quiet, constant sound, too soft for him to hear the voices within it. And the final part of this chapter is Muss didn't come into the work the next day. She just messaged him saying she's on cleanup duty, which is it. So she's gone to go be a vigilante, basically. And Miller describes the office the atmosphere in the office, or the office in the atmosphere, you could probably argue both, being very, very excited, because obviously the government's kind of gone, but they're still in charge, so they've kind of got more power, being the only actual authority there. Equally, they're fucked, because there's a manic high, panic pressed through a cheesecloth mask of normalcy. It wasn't going to last. And Miller's thinking maybe he should rally, or everyone else is getting excited and energized, maybe he should do the same thing. Because obviously a load of them are excited the inners have gone away, it's kind of the Belt is back in charge. But Miller says the truth was that he thought that the thought of that made him tired. And he gets summoned to Shadid, and he goes into Shadid's office, and Dawes is there, Anderson Dawes, who's the OPA cop. And she says, this is going to be tough. We're facing something harder than anything we've had to do before. I need a team I can trust in my life. And Miller's like, okay, yeah, fuck, I'll stop drinking, please. She says, Miller, you're not a bad person at heart. There was a time you were a half-decent cop, but I don't trust you, and we don't have time to start over. You're fired. Her voice as gentle, as near to gentle as he had ever heard it. And the chapter ends. So it's a good one there. You get Miller kind of working on that project again, going through his motions, and also kind of dealing with, like, you realise he's this alcoholic, depressed man who's hearing female voices at the same time as well, and then losing his job at the end of it to kind of top it all off. But you also kind of get this Belt, the Belt wants to win. So you see, like, even the average person in the Belt just fucking hates the inners, and they're excited it's all over and stuff. Yeah, it's a nice one, that. I think it's a good one as well to tee up now Miller isn't attached to Star Helix anymore, and that means he isn't really attached to Ceres because he's not nothing there. So it's a very good chapter and kind of spurring the next few steps of Miller moving forward, which is always good. But yeah, thank you for enjoying it. Thank you for listening with me, and I hope you have a lovely week.